All right. Well, uh, we're at almost close to the top of the hour, so I'll go ahead and get things started here. So again, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Tyler Curry. I'm a cyber threat intelligence analyst with Health ISAC, and I will be moderator for today's joint presentation. For today's Navigator webinar, speakers will can expect to have hear a breakdown regarding the layered complexity of wireless connectivity in medical devices, the evolving FDA regulatory landscape, and how connectivity can be a security enabler rather than a liability. Before we get started with introducing today's speakers, I want to cover some housekeeping rules or notes. Today's webinar will be recorded and made available for playback. So if you would like to revisit today's content later on, that will be made available to you. Also, feel free to post questions in the Q&A section, as we have reserved some time at the end of today's session to address those questions. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started with introducing today's speakers. We have Naomi Schwartz, Vice President of Regulatory Strategy at Medcrypt, and Dr. Omar Al-Kalaa, Founder and Principal Technologist at Inovectrum. And with that, I'll hand it over to today's speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. So let's get started on our topic today about connecting and securing medical devices. Here is my quick bio. You can read it offline. I'm not going to occupy your time by going through this. Same for Naomi. And just a quick disclaimer that the information we're going to present is not legal advice. It's not to be acted on as such, and it attempts to be current and is subject to change without notice. The outline for our conversation today will be split into two parts. The first is focused on wireless connectivity and the different nuances related to that topic. And then that becomes a segue into cybersecurity. And the catchphrase that I hope you remember when I end my segment is, now you're connected, how do you deal with security? We're going to cover several topics related to each subject. And one take-home message that I hope stays with everybody in attendance is that all of these topics are very closely interrelated. And just like any system that has software running on specific hardware, whether that is commercial off the shelf or custom built, the topics of interoperability, connectivity, and cybersecurity, they're all interconnected, and they impact each other. So decisions made in one area directly result in outcomes in the other area. But today we're going only to focus on connectivity and cybersecurity. That doesn't take anything away from the other topics, but this is the subject of our webinar today. So what's a wireless medical device? That covers a very vast area of use cases and applications. So imagine you have a medical device that is transmitting over Bluetooth to the patient's smartphone. This could be a pulse oximeter, for example. This indicates that the patient is in close proximity to the medical device. The medical device could also be using Wi-Fi to send similar data to the patient's phone. Here you can imagine a bedside vital signs monitor that is sending its data through the Wi-Fi, the home Wi-Fi network to the patient's smartphone, or to a caregiver that is also present in the home. Now, to add another layer, the patient's smartphone could be sending data to a cloud service over the 5G network. And that includes two steps of connectivity segments. The first is over the air between the smartphone and the cell tower, and then over fiber between the cell tower and the core network of the cellular network, and then to the cloud service. The medical device can also be used in a hospital where it's using Ethernet hospital connectivity to upload data to a cloud service, also again going over a fiber connection between the hospital and the cloud service provider. So as you can see, a connected medical device can have many, many forms, and each of these technologies is associated with specific nuances and features. This slide is really intended to show the diversity of wireless technologies that are available in medical devices today. All of these are in active use in medical devices. whether Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, which are very common, to different flavors of cellular connectivity like 4G and 5G, proprietary technologies, ultra-wideband, inductive links. Wireless comes in so many different forms and shapes. And again, selecting a wireless technology that is fit for purpose is at the core of building a successful medical device. And this is really a segue to the next section of this topic, which is how do you select the wireless modality or the connectivity modality that is suitable for your particular device. You should start with the basics. You should start by asking questions like, how much data do I have? How quickly do I want to transmit that data? How much latency can I tolerate? The use case that my medical device is implementing, how latency tolerant is it? How often do I need to send? Am I sending a packet every hour, or am I streaming video that forces me to transmit at much higher frequency? Is my device using the mains power, or is it battery operated? Because the more I use my wireless module or my network module, the more energy consumption that is going to result. Does my use case include very limited distance of communication? So is it between the patient's wrist and their smartphone, or is my medical device being used over an ambulance and it's going from one neighborhood to the next and traversing different coverage zones in the city? And then a very important point that is often overlooked is, what is the revenue model for my medical device, specifically when it comes to connectivity? Is the device being sold as a one-time expense, or is there subscription expenses that will be ongoing? Because if you're looking, for example, at cellular connectivity, basically you should ask yourself the question, who's paying the bill? Just like we pay the bill to everybody's phone monthly. So choosing the right connectivity modality is really a critical decision. It will influence how your device is designed, how it's built, how it's verified and validated, and how it's tested. Now, another important point is that just because a wireless technology was designed to achieve certain capabilities, that doesn't mean that you're going to see all of those capabilities in practice available to your device. There are always trade-offs between the different factors that affect the wireless connection. And the more you dive into your use case, the better clarity you should start to have about those trade-offs so that you can select an adequate connectivity modality. Moving on, an important topic that should be thought of very closely when it comes to wireless technologies is spectrum. All wireless technologies operate in a certain spectrum band. Spectrum can be characterized by the three parameters that you see on the screen: time, frequency, and power. And the purpose of having this figure here is to indicate that different wireless modalities access the spectrum in different ways. So for Bluetooth, for example, Bluetooth hops over different frequency channels over time. So at this moment, it's operating at this channel. At the next moment, it's operating on a different channel. And this is one way that Bluetooth uses to avoid interference. So if there is a static interference on a certain channel, then the Bluetooth connection will only suffer from that interference only for the period during which it was using that channel, but then it will move on to a different one. Wi-Fi has a completely different way of accessing the channel. It is static in frequency, so there is a static Wi-Fi channel that the connection will be using to transmit data, but then Wi-Fi adopts something called listen before talk, or LBT. So it listens if there is interference on that channel before it accesses it. If there is, it backs off, it waits for that interference to go away, then it accesses the channel again. So long story short, different wireless technologies use the spectrum in different ways, and spectrum comes in different flavors. So there are unlicensed spectrum bands, like the 2.4 gigahertz unlicensed spectrum band used by Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. And by unlicensed, that means there are no protections for the devices that use that band. So you are not guaranteed access to the wireless channel whenever you want to use it. You do your best to access that channel and push your data through, but there are absolutely no guarantees. You haven't paid to access that channel. It is freely available to everybody. On the flip side, there are licensed spectrum bands, like those used by cellular network providers. And a good portion of the monthly bill that you pay for your smartphone goes to pay the very high fees associated with those spectrum licenses. But those licenses come with protections. So interference is managed by that spectrum type. There is a hybrid model in between licensed and unlicensed, and it's the shared spectrum band model. An example in the US is the Citizens Broadband Radio Service at 3.5 gigahertz. And this is a model where it is not freely available in the sense of being unlicensed. There are certain rules that the users must follow to protect the incumbent user of that spectrum. So if the primary user of the spectrum wants to use it, everybody else should yield. And there is a central coordination mechanism for how that happens. It's not the same as in Wi-Fi, where everybody can simply buy an access point and set it up in their home and they're good to go. That introduction really leads us into how does FDA view connectivity and wireless technology in general. The FDA has a wireless guidance that has been in existence for quite some time. That wireless guidance is not technology specific. It offers high-level thoughts and considerations for the different topics that should be considered by a medical device manufacturer when they're designing their wireless medical device. But at the same time, it's not only limited to wireless. There are many principles in that guidance that apply to both wireless and wired technology. The eStar submission, which I'm hoping that most people in attendance are familiar with, has a specific section for reporting on the used wireless technology, how it was evaluated, how it was tested, how the risks associated with it were addressed. And under that section, there are segments for the device description, the evaluation, and the labeling. All of those information can be traced back to the FDA wireless guidance. So a little bit more about that guidance, because it has a lot of meat and topics that it covers. The initial draft of that guidance was released in 2007, and it was intended to guide the use of wireless technology in medical devices. Fast forward 10 years later, it was officially published in 2017, and it remains active today. That guidance, as I mentioned on the previous slide, is the basis for the questions that you can find in the eStar submission. So if you haven't already, and if you're working on a connected medical device, I highly encourage you to go and read that guidance. I think you will walk out by having a better plan for how to develop your medical device. The guidance walks into a risk-based recommendations for wireless performance, for labeling, and for testing. And this is consistent with FDA's approach in many other guidance documents. So if you've been in the space for a while, you'll find the guidance written in very familiar terms. It covers sections like the selection and performance of the wireless technology. Again, the technology that you should be picking for your particular use case should be fit for purpose. If you want to stream high definition video, probably Bluetooth is not your best option. If you want to conserve battery and you only have needs for transmitting data infrequently, then Bluetooth makes a lot of sense. So somewhere in between the different connectivity modalities, you should be thinking about which one is best fit for purpose and how I'm going to communicate that selection process to the FDA. The topic of quality of service is also addressed at length in the guidance. I have a slide coming up on that. Wireless coexistence, EMC, or the electromagnetic compatibility of the wireless technology. And finally, there are labeling recommendations that are outlined in the guidance. Because we're talking about risk, then naturally we should be talking about the failure modes that come with integrating a wireless or connectivity module in a medical device. The guidance itself spells out several failure modes that are relevant in this area, like unexpected connection loss. And again, none of this is technology specific. it's unexpected connection loss in general. So how your particular connectivity modality might experience this. This is something that you should be thinking about. Failure to connect, so link availability is something of consideration. Service degradation, so if your device requires a specific level of throughput to push the data that it needs to push in time, and then you don't have that support for the needed throughput, how will your device react to that degradation? So again, these failure modes are explicitly stated in the guidance. But besides that, there are also additional technology-specific issues. So for example, if you pick Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, as we discussed, these technologies operate in the unlicensed spectrum bands, which gives rise to the issue of wireless coexistence, because it's not only you on that channel, you have to share the channel with basically everybody who wants to use it, whether those users are medical devices or people streaming videos, YouTube and Netflix, or whoever wants to use that channel. If you're using cellular, then you should be thinking about how your device will be used during mobility, how the handovers between the different cell towers might impact or degrade the service that your particular device requires. How would congestion on the network be handled, and how will that be communicated to you as a device user? And then how to set up the cybersecurity profile of your device to be allowed on the cellular network. So all of these topics are things that should be discussed with the cellular network operator that your device is intended to use as their service provider. The general failure modes of dropped links, packet loss, roaming issues can lead to serious consequences. These can give rise to risks to patient safety and data integrity. So even though sometimes they are taken for granted, like, hey, I just established my network link and I'm good to go, I should start to worry what goes on that link. The link itself is vital for your connected medical system if your device function depends on that network link. So you should pay close attention to how that link is constructed, how it is established, and how it's tested. So I just want to say a few words about the communication quality of service, because I've previously observed manufacturers having a tough time with understanding what is being requested in the eStore template when it asks about quality of service. So the definition of quality of service, as it is presented in the FDA guidance, it's the necessary level of service and performance needed for the wireless function of the medical device. And as you can see here, that quality of service, or that QoS, is specific to the wireless function of your medical device. So one common pitfall that I've seen before is that manufacturers would say, well, I'm using Bluetooth's quality of service. Well, that is the wireless technology. That's not, Bluetooth is not your device. What are you using Bluetooth to communicate? What data is your device pushing over the Bluetooth link? Asking that question is the first step in determining the quality of service that your device needs, that then Bluetooth will come and help serve those needs. The guidance talks about specific metrics, because quality of service should be quantitative. It's not enough to say, hey, I want good quality of service. You should say how exactly I want it to be. It should be described in terms of latency, in terms of the probability of data loss, throughput, for example, accessibility, how often do you want your link to be up, and how often do you want it, how well does your device tolerate the lack of availability for the network link. The QoS specification should align with your device's intended use. So again, if you want to push high definition video, that's perfectly fine, but you should start to characterize the needed quality of service based on that codec that you're using for your HD video and how much data does it generate over time. If obviously you can go higher, but if you don't do that, you will not be doing yourself a favor in communicating how does your device operate over the specific wireless technology and how it can be tested later on, as we will be discussing in the subsequent slides. The intended use may require an evaluation. The quality of service on its own is something of a descriptor. It's just a basic building block. It's a piece of information that you put on paper to say, okay, my design requires this. But then based on how you're going to use the wireless connection, there can be steps, and we're going to discuss those, where you should do your best to demonstrate that you actually are achieving the needs that you want and your device in total operates safely and effectively. So I mentioned evaluation a few times, and as a practical recognition of how common Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and other similar technologies are in medical devices. And again, those technologies are excellent. They're available. They're not very expensive to implement. And they're ubiquitous. Everybody has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth in their smartphone. So it makes a lot of sense to be used. But those technologies also operate in unlicensed spectrum. And the issue of wireless coexistence is central to that type of spectrum access. Wireless coexistence is the ability of one wireless system, this can be your medical device, to perform a task, which is your device's intended function or wireless function, in a given shared environment, which is basically everywhere. Everywhere is a shared environment when it comes to wireless, where other systems in that environment have an ability to perform their tasks. So your device should not be interfering with and preventing other devices from operating on that spectrum. And those other devices you have no control over. So if your device is using Bluetooth, you can't ask others not to use Wi-Fi. You just simply can't, unless you have a strictly controlled environment with shielding and access rules. And that is very, very rare. The FDA has been engaged for many years in the development and recognition of standardized documents to address wireless coexistence because it's an important issue. The first of these documents is a risk management document. It came out of ANI, which is TIR 69. It was published in 2017, reaffirmed in 2020. This document walks the manufacturer through a risk management and assessment process that results in a risk category determination. So it basically asks you questions about how are you going to use the device? What are the consequences of service degradation? What will happen? What is the level of harm? And then it combines all that input into saying, hey, here is the risk category that might fit your device, the wireless function of your device in particular, because here we're talking about the rest of the wireless function, not the overall risk of the device. Once that risk determination is completed, then comes the step of testing for wireless coexistence. And this is done using the ANSI C63.27 standard. The most recent revision of the standard was published in 2021, and there is an ongoing effort now in the ANSI Subcommittee 7 for Spectrum Etiquette to revise the standard and expand its scope and make it more useful for the community. So like I mentioned, the risk management document walks you into a process that helps the manufacturer determine the appropriate risk category for their wireless function. If the result of that process is that your wireless function has negligible risk, that's the end of story. You don't have to do much after that point, because the document, which is again recognized by FDA, you can see the FDA recognized standard database for an updated reference. If the wireless risk is negligible, then wireless coexistence testing is not recommended. But if the risk is anything other than negligible, so minor, moderate, or major, then wireless coexistence testing is recommended. And it increases in testing thoroughness. So the tests that you will be doing for a device with a minor risk wireless function are fewer and less exhaustive than the ones you do for a moderate risk. And those are less exhaustive than the ones you do for a major risk. So the C63.27 standard specifies two things. The first is a set of test methods for how wireless coexistence testing can be performed. And then it specifies recommended guidance for technology-specific testing. So if you have a Bluetooth device, the standard provides you with specific test signals and test levels, channel occupancy values that you can directly plug into your test system to evaluate your device. Moving on, I want to do a quick mention of the FDA EMC guidance or electromagnetic compatibility. This is relatively a recent guidance, even though the topic of EMC has for very long been considered by FDA in basically all types of device submissions. The initial draft of the guidance was released in 2020. And then the official version was released in 2022. It is active today. Again, similar to the wireless guidance, it forms the basis for the EMC section in eStar. The guidance highlights that a medical device being evaluated for immunity to common electromagnetic emitters should also look into technologies like RFID, NFC, WPT, and cellular 5G, even if your device is not using any of those technologies. The guidance is simply describing the environment that your device is going to be used in and highlighting that those emissions coming from these technologies will be present. So your device needs to be evaluated for its immunity to withstand those emissions. And again, if you haven't, I highly encourage you to go read the guidance. It's really comprehensive and useful. But moving on, I want to quickly highlight a few pitfalls in the evaluation of connectivity that I've seen over time. And I'm hoping that this is of value to the attendees. Misunderstanding of quality of service. By far, this is the most common issue that I've seen. And it is the central topic of many, many conversations that I continue to have to this day. Your device is trying to do something. What is that thing? You have to start there. You have to think in those terms. My device wants to transfer an image from point A to point B. It wants to send a vital sign update from point A to point B. Then think, what data goes into that message? How often do I need to send that data? And that helps you take steps to characterize your quality of service, the needed quality of service for your device. And then the wireless technology is a tool that helps you meet that need for connectivity. Just saying I'm using Wi-Fi doesn't actually mean much in terms of quality of service. So please consider what your device is doing and how you're helping your device achieve its intended use. Another very common pitfall is the over-reliance on FCC certification. FCC and FDA share an overlapping responsibility in regulating wireless medical devices. Now, if you have a medical device and you have a wireless module, I'm willing to bet that it already has an FCC certification that was provided by the OEM of that wireless module. There are many medical device manufacturers that consider that FCC certification to be the end of story when it comes to wireless evaluation. It is not. FCC certification meets FCC requirements for market access. It does not meet FDA's concerns about how wireless is being used in your particular device and how it's affecting the safety profile of that device and how the totality of the submission can demonstrate safety and efficacy. So if you're planning on saying, hey, I have FCC certification, that's enough, please don't do that. The next very common point of confusion that, again, I continue to observe is confusing wireless coexistence testing with EMC immunity testing. EMC immunity has been tested for many, many years. There are a plethora of test labs out there providing EMC test services. And it is a very common practice. So manufacturers are used to checking the EMC box by sending their device to a test lab and saying, okay, give us back the reports. Wireless coexistence is not an EMC immunity test. It is, as of today, not a part of the EMC test standards. There is a specific standard for how to test wireless coexistence. The process of testing wireless coexistence is fundamentally different from the process of testing a device for immunity. So please don't confuse the two topics. They are complementary. They are not one and the same. Next up is the risk category disagreement. So as I mentioned in the AMETIR 69 document, you go in a process to determine the risk level, the risk category of your device wireless function. Sometimes manufacturers pick the wrong category and say, my device has a negligible risk, and FDA comes back and say, we disagree. So please take that exercise with as much attention as you can dedicate to it. It is an important exercise. If you end up in the wrong risk category, that will prolong the period during which you're evaluating and you're going about your testing for the device, and then it will result in a back and forth with the FDA. So don't pick negligible because it says you don't need to test after it, that unless it's really a valid position. Moving on, because there is a one-to-one matching between the risk assessment document and the testing document, the issues 5 and 6 often come up. Issue 5 is the incorrect application of ANSI C63.27. So the standard talks about evaluating the transmitter and the receiver of your device. If you just apply it to one of them, then you're inviting questions to like what happens to the other part of your device. Your device is connecting to something. Where is that something? So this is very common. The last pitfall is the mismatched evaluation tier. So, and I haven't talked about the evaluation tiers, but in a nutshell, C63.27 specifies 3 tiers of decreased thoroughness of testing, tiers 1 through 3. And these are matched one-to-one with the risk categories. So if your device of a minor risk category, it is tested according to tier 3. If it's of a major risk category, it is testing according to tier 1. It is often the case where a major risk device is tested according to tier 3, which is appropriate for minor risk. And that is obviously not a good thing. So FDA pays attention to those topics, and they are part of the information that is requested in eStar. So please do yourself a favor and try to double check that the evaluation tier used for your wireless coexistence testing matches the risk determination that you found in AMETIR 69. So let's summarize the key takeaways. Connectivity is a critical design decision. Don't just pick Bluetooth because it's Bluetooth and everybody likes it. Pick Bluetooth because it makes sense for you. Understand the differences between the different modalities. The regulatory expectations really go beyond the technical specs of any connectivity modality. So there is no magic recipe that says, I use that link with X, Y, and Z parameters, so FDA will be happy. FDA is looking at the totality of your device and how all of it works together. And again, just like any other topic related to medical devices, think early and try to plan how you're going to demonstrate safety and efficacy down the line. And at this point, assuming that you've done all of the above adequately, you have a connected device, and you should start worrying about how to secure that connected device. And here I hand it over to Naomi.
All right, assuming I can get my mouse to work here. Once you've got a connected device, you really do have to think deeply about what cybersecurity elements pertain to your intended use environment, the users themselves. and the connectivity modality. So it's really critical to ask yourself, now what? I have a connected device. There are really critical elements to the connectivity, or maybe the elements to connectivity are not so critical. What do you do about it? And how do you know if you're a cyber device? Well, if you're connected, you are a cyber device, for starters. But FDA's definition about a cyber device is really any device that contains software that has the ability, not your intention, but the ability, a capacity, intended or not, to connect to the internet, and that could be vulnerable to cybersecurity threats. I would go so far as to say if you have software, you could be vulnerable to cybersecurity threats. So those two are, in my mind, somewhat redundant. But connectivity is really that cyber device's features that enable it to connect to other devices. Okay, jumping around. Why are my slides jumping on me? Okay. So once you're connected, you have to consider what FDA means by that ability to connect to the internet, because there's been a lot of confusion about that, and a lot of manufacturers have really struggled to explain between the R&D teams and their quality and reg teams, what does this mean? I didn't intend for it to connect to the internet, but somebody found a way to make it do so. Well, you have the ability, right? That is unnecessarily complicating your life, but it's a fact. People can plug something into a USB port, and if they can find the right accesses, they can enable it to now communicate wirelessly through some kind of a dongle. The guidance is very specific about what it applies to. So for cybersecurity considerations, if you've got this software, including firmware or programmable logic, you have to take the guidance into account. It's not just limited to devices that are network enabled or contain other connected capabilities. Translation, if you have a USB port, an SD port, a CD drive, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, RF, cloud connection, Ethernet, you are a connected device. Just don't tell people, well, USB port's only intended for service, so it's not connected. It is in fact connected, and FDA will expect the entire E-Star section to be filled in. Note that the entirety of the E-Star section being filled in is not the same as having comprehensive data for every element of the E-Star section. There are times when it is not necessary to provide extensive documentation based on risk and based on the connectivity modalities and things like that, but they do expect you to say something for every element. That something may be a blank document that says this section is unnecessary because, and please have a very strong rationale if you do that. But you can say this section is not relevant. Again, with a strong rationale. So if you're a cyber device, you're subject to cybersecurity regulations. And more specifically, you are subject now to statute. So what's the difference here? The highest bar in US law is statute. That is what is written into the actual Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. For example, Section 524B of the Act is statute. Those are requirements. They say you shall, period. Don't argue, just do it. Below that are regulations, which are an interpretation of the statute, and those can be argued in court. You can argue with FDA in person, you can argue with them over emails, but those are things that may be prone to some negotiation because they are an interpretation of the law and not the law itself. If it's written in 524B of the Act, just do it. Like, there's your Nike theme. But if it's in regulation, there are times where there's some flexibility, some wiggle room. Below regulation are guidance. These are recommendations. Now, sometimes FDA staff take the recommendations and the guidance, point back to 524B and say you must have because 524B says so. If it's actually not written in 524B, that's not necessarily true. So guidance is recommendations, and I hear this from the attorney in my household all the time. Recommendations are not the same as requirements. You should strongly account for recommendations, but it does not mean that you must have every element annotated in the guidance. You must have everything that's stated in the statute. That's really, really important. and a touchy point. FDA is updating their guidance documents at a very rapid pace with respect to cybersecurity. So we had a guidance document for years and years and years, and it really hadn't changed much. And then suddenly, rapid change, new drafts, new finals, more updates to the final, and then more finalization. We see new final guidance for off-the-shelf software. We see new final guidance for device software functions and final guidance for pre-market. This is happening because there have been more and more incidents in pre and post market indicating that manufacturers are not taking a mature enough approach to cybersecurity for their devices. So FDA is saying the risks are increasing, the threats are evolving, you're not keeping up, we're going to have to tell you more about what we expect. The history extends all the way back to 2005, where we're talking about early discussions about commercial off-the-shelf software. There were a slew of executive orders. There were a slew of very high-profile cybersecurity incidents, and that led to rapid shifts in putting out pre-market guidance, putting out post-market guidance, updating pre-market guidance again and again and again. You're also seeing a patchwork of state laws that are starting to affect how people are thinking about cybersecurity with respect to confidentiality in particular and privacy laws. So in addition to federal law, you should also be thinking about making sure that your device design is accommodating state laws in California, Texas, Massachusetts, Florida that have gone above and beyond what the US government through the FDA and the Act are mandating. These considerations create a real headache for making decisions because when you think you've gotten through FDA and then California comes back and says, hey, we have a new law, you're going to have to make sure that you're also meeting that one. There are a lot of standards that FDA leverages to help make it easier for you to understand how. Once they tell you what they want, these tell you how to do it, how to implement it. TIR 57 and 97 are pre and post market considerations for risk management. Those are technical information reports though, and not technically not standards. Software 96 is the standard that brings the two together and really focuses on the standards languages, the shalls. 81001-5-1 is really useful for looking at your security lifecycle practices. What activities do you need to engage in? If you're not leveraging it today, you can use other methods to create something like a total product lifecycle security plan. But I strongly recommend, actually using this because in some cases, outside of the US, this may actually be part of the law. In Japan, it is expected that you will leverage the Japanese version of 81001-5-1, and they actually apply that to transitional and legacy as well. So there's an expectation that you're leveraging these. And if you do leverage it with respect to the US, it makes things easier because the FDA reviewers actually know what this means. They understand it and they know the expected format for the information. So it's really useful to leverage them, even though it means you have to stay on top of a lot of different standards. There are other standards that are a little bit more complicated to figure out how to leverage, I think is the right way to put it. There are 11073 standards that apply to personal healthcare devices and point of care devices that attempt to lay out how to engage in interoperability and how to secure those interoperable elements. Some manufacturers use these heavily, others don't use them at all. But the Bluetooth SIG, the special interest group, has implemented Bluetooth specific versions of these standards. These are protocol agnostic, so that there's actually an opportunity to leverage Bluetooth SIG services and profiles to describe how your Bluetooth device functions and interoperates with other things in its ecosystem. It is really, really a good idea if you're considering using Bluetooth to look at the Bluetooth SIG. Unfortunately, FDA currently does not consider them a standards defining organization, so they don't recognize the Bluetooth SIG work products, even though they are based on recognized standards like 11073. That is a thing that I've been trying to talk to them about for a while, and I think it should be eventually adjusted with enough pressure from industry, but keep in mind that the Bluetooth SIG products really do follow the standards. So if you're using a Bluetooth SIG product and it correlates to a standard, cite the standard. 2900-1 is a cybersecurity network connectable products safety standard from ANSI and UL. And then there's 2901-2. And then finally, IEEE UL 2621.2, which is for diabetes devices. When the regulator says that they want evidence, these standards help you generate the right kinds of evidence. So that's really how you're leveraging them. You are getting to a place where you have clean, clear, sufficient evidence to convince your regulatory body that you have done what you need to do to assess risk, to mitigate risk, to trace all of that. So, all right, what does it actually mean? Let's keep it simple. Starting fundamentally at the CIA triad, we've got confidentiality. That means that my data is only shared with authorized individuals. Integrity. My data that was transmitted by object A is received by object B, and it is not changed, intentionally or unintentionally. Availability. If there's a problem with this system, I can still operate through. For anybody who was affected by the AWS server outages earlier this week, you know that availability is actually a really big deal. People say, oh, well, it's just AWS. It's AWS, which causes your Ring doorbell not to function, which causes, DoorDash and other services to go down. It is a cascading problem. And when we talk about availability, I want a fail-safe mode. I want your device to say, well, I don't have wireless connection right now. I'm going to keep functioning in some safe state while I wait for this to recover. Operate through is really critical. But at the core of those three is usability. And usability has a lot of friction with cybersecurity. So you really need to account for who is the user, what is their maturity level in managing all of this? How do I take as much burden off of them as possible and keep my device simple so that my 90-year-old grandmother isn't trying to figure out what these words mean, whereas my 12-year-old son would be like, oh, grandma, it just means, X, Y, and Z. Like, we need to keep it at a level that every potential user can understand and work through. And that is really, really hard. How does this wireless connectivity enable or even facilitate cybersecurity? Because it's also a new attack surface, right? So you're like, well, I don't want to add it because now I have to protect it, but it actually facilitates certain things. If you have cryptographic verification, you have some digital signing that allows you to verify authenticity. Is that actually the support package coming from the provider I think it's coming from? You have secure communication. You can share data back with other providers, other, people who are representing the patient, advocates, family members, caregivers. You have secure storage. If my data from a medical device is transmitted to my personal cell phone, I don't want my kids to be able to open up my cell phone and just like pull the data off and share it with their friends. It needs to be in a secure, locked down environment on that phone. I don't want somebody else to plug into the phone with a USB cord and be able to just yank the data off. I want rollback mechanisms. I want both a way to roll back if I update and it fails, and a prevention from somebody else intentionally rolling me back to a less secure version of whatever application I'm running. And I also want timely patching. So when you have a medical device and something goes wrong, there's a new vulnerability, or worse, a 0-day, I want to be able to rapidly triage that and get updates out to the various devices. I worked through a bunch of those while I was at FDA, like Urgent 11 and Swain Tooth, where we're on the phone all day calling people. Are you affected? Have you checked if you're affected? What can you do if you're affected? What's the risk? Can you disconnect the device from the whatever network locally at the hospital? Can you take it off of, Bluetooth or Wi-Fi for a period of time? If not, what could go wrong if you leave it on? How do you communicate that to customers? Fast, like today, fast, right? If you can do secure over-the-air patching, which isn't going to happen overnight, let's be clear about that. You're going to have to test a patch, integrate it into your quality management system, get it through all its V&V, and then put it out there. If you can do it over the air securely and you've got, signed software updates, you can roll this out quickly and you can check the status. What proportion of the devices have been connected, have received the patch, and had success? If you don't have over-the-air, you're sending what Brian Fitzgerald at FDA used to call his fleet of technicians in their Toyota Priuses with USB thumb drives out to update all the devices. There are security problems with that modality too. Connectivity does improve security and create resilience. So if you need to be able to get out there and do 72-hour patching, it's kind of hard without connectivity, right? You got to get a lot of people out into the field really fast and get these patches applied. Your timeline is aggressive, but it's possible when you're connected. The cost to patch is not based on device count. If you have 500 devices in the field, you have to send out either 500 technicians or it takes a number of weeks to do it. Versus, well, they're all connected to the internet. I can just reach out and touch each one and say, I have a patch, accept it, confirm it's done, and check it off your list. You have more flexibility. You can do administrative updates remotely. You have better protection of your keying material. You have device telemetry and log files that you can be correlated. You can pull them back more rapidly and make decisions about whether or not you're seeing a cybersecurity signal. So connectivity is really the foundation for mitigating that post-market risk. That, in a nutshell, is how to get your devices connected and how to secure them when they're connected without getting into, too many technical details. But we'd love to have some time for questions now.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Naomi and Omar, for that informative presentation. We do have a couple questions to address here in the Q&A section, so we can go ahead and get started with those. So the first question here, so does it matter if you have a USB or other serial connectors inside the shell of the medical device? I guess the context of this question is, where it may not be used by the customer wouldn't necessarily know about that unless they open the case or the shell of the medical device. Does FDA even care about that? Or do you have any information that you can provide around that scenario and that question?
That is a great question. The short answer is yes, FDA cares, and they want you to talk about the risks and how you're going to manage those risks. The more complicated answer to it is, how easy is it for me to crack that case? Now, internal to Medcrypt, we have a running joke that I zip around with my Dremel tool and I grind things open all the time. It's not really a joke, it's true. I mean, I'm a hardware engineer at heart and I like working with tools. If I can walk up to you and see your medical device and pop the case open on it and plug into your USB port, you haven't really protected it. If it's behind a key, maybe I can jimmy the lock. It might take me 5 extra minutes. It might take me 10. Depends on the complexity of cracking the case. When you work with a penetration test house, you may work with one that actually will go to the extreme of cracking the case, or in some cases, I know that some CGM manufacturers had theirs tested and somebody actually unpucked the epoxy, which takes some knowledge of chemistry and some lab equipment and a really good ventilation hood, because that stuff stinks and it's probably not good to breathe it in. But they actually unpucked these things in a way that they could confirm that they did not damage the printed circuit boards. Do you have to go that far? Typically, no. However, when your devices are disposable like a CGM, if you're just tossing it in your residential trash and somebody says, oh, I want to go and reverse engineer the thing, as a manufacturer, you should consider whether or not your IP can be stolen. So it's not just the risk to the patient, it's a question of protecting your business interests as well. So would I recommend that you test to that degree to understand your business risk? Yes. Is that necessary from the safety and effectiveness perspective for FDA? Not always. You do want to make sure it's sealed, though.
Yeah, may I rephrase what you said? I totally agree with everything you said. I just would like to say it in a different way, if that's okay. So yeah. I understood the question in a way that is asking, do I need to tell FDA about the existence of that port? And the answer is a resounding yes. Please do. Does it exist? It does. So please tell FDA. By doing so, you've identified a risk. then you should be describing to FDA what is your plan to mitigate that risk. If your plan includes any of the components that Naomi shared, then wonderful. If it doesn't, please lay out your plan, and FDA will assess that plan, and they might agree with it. It might make sense for your particular device. It might not. But please tell the FDA, please develop a plan. Don't go unnoticed. That's a bad decision.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. If you claim that there isn't any port because it's not accessible to the user and FDA sees something in a diagram that shows that there's a USB port, they're going to call you on that.
Oh yeah.
Not necessarily they're going to say, hey, you're lying, but they're going to say you forgot to tell us something, right? If they see persistent behavior of that nature, they might start asking whether or not you're lying to them, and you don't want to instigate some kind of directed inspection, which does in fact happen when FDA suspects that a manufacturer is lying to them. So be very, very careful about being overt. We have a bunch of ports. They are locked down inside the system behind a case, behind locks, with special tamper-resistant screws and tamper-evident seals. All of those details show that you've thought about the risk and show that you're doing something to protect from it. But if you fail to do that, FDA's reaction is usually, hey, there's a port. Tell me about it. Give me your risk analysis. Do your threat modeling. Tell me all these details.
And a very similar occurrence to this, Naomi, often happens in the device labeling, where the device labeling talks about a function that requires the existence of X, Y, and Z, but nowhere else in the submission was ever mentioned that this thing existed. So you're inviting a question to like, okay, how exactly are you going to do this?
Exactly. There's a question about distinguishing FDA's cybersecurity focus on SOUP and software bill of materials and the trends. The trend is tell me everything that is in your medical device, including the things that it talks to that may be ancillary, because there could be risks associated with that chain back into the device itself, even if it's not a medical device function. So they want you to tell them everything. How far everything goes is a fractal problem because it's turtles all the way down. You can keep breaking out your software bill of materials, but in some cases, they're packaged in a way that you can't individually manage them. And so you need to address that in some way by talking about what are dependencies of dependencies. Software of unknown provenance or open source software or off-the-shelf software needs to be assessed for risk, because if it's open source and it's being maintained intermittently, at least you have evidence of some kind of maintenance. If it's not being maintained, you probably need to ask whether or not you should keep using it, because if something goes wrong, you might be waiting a very long time for somebody to do something about it, and that's on you, not on them, from an FDA perspective. I think I'm going to let Omar address the last question.
So the last question, how does FDA address protocols and encryption levels, WPA3, AES 128 versus 256? Are there existing vulnerabilities known for any of these? That's how you should start asking the question. When you're implementing any type of cryptographic function within your device, you should start by looking into the known vulnerabilities for that function and whether you have addressed those. And if there are, then probably you shouldn't be using them, because most likely the adequate action to take is not to use it and use the better version. Naomi, anything you'd like to add?
I will say, and this is important, that FDA is not the final arbiter as to whether or not something like AES 128 is deprecated. For that, you need to go to NIST.
Yes.
NIST will tell you that, for example, SHA-1 is still acceptable for certain types of hashing behavior, but it is not acceptable for other uses, because there are elements of it that are prone to certain types of attacks that affect certain functionality. AES 128 is, going to hit a big bump in the road when we run into quantum breaking of algorithms, though, and so are, quite frankly, a number of other algorithms. So you need to be thinking today, if you have a 5-year timeline for development, about being ready to handle post-quantum cryptography, because it's going to require more processing capacity and other elements that you're probably going to need to change hardware and or software or firmware in order to sustain, and your product development life cycle could be 3 to 5 years. The US government procurement says you need to be ready for post-quantum crypto in 2030. Well, guess what? That's only 4 years and a few months away. So when you're thinking about cryptography and what you're using and how you're securing a wireless connection, you should be thinking about all these elements. You should also, for Bluetooth, consider what NIST says about Bluetooth, just works and inherent Bluetooth security versus adding application layer security on top, because it is not adequate for certain use cases to protect the integrity of your data if you just rely on Bluetooth native security.
Right. Seems like that was the last question.
Awesome. Well, yes, you're correct, Omar. I'm not seeing any other questions in the queue here. So with that will conclude the remainder of today's webinar. I would like to thank today's speakers, Omar and Naomi, and those for joining us during today's webinar, and hope everyone enjoys the remainder of their day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.